As an elderly veteran, Wade Harlan lives alone on an old ranch in Oklahoma, facing poverty, community indifference, and the threat of eviction. But when he gives all his savings to the widow of a fallen comrade in arms, the act sets off a wave of events that will change his life. The Army recognizes his valor, saves his home, and restores his dignity. In the end, Wade becomes a symbol of quiet strength, proven not by words, but by actions that leave a mark on the hearts of others. Welcome to my channel. I'm Wade Harlan, 68 years old, and I live alone on the outskirts of a nowhere town called Dry Creek, Oklahoma. The name's fitting, hasn't rained worth a damn in nearly 2 years. My place sits on the edge of what used to be my family's cattle ranch. It's a patch of dry earth, stubborn mesquites, and old memories. My bones ache when the wind changes, and the roof over the barn leans like a tired old mule, but it's mine. Always has been. My granddad bought this land back in 1925, and I've spent most of my life trying to keep it alive. I served in Desert Storm when I was a much younger man, fresh out of high school and full of piss and vinegar. Got back, married my high school sweetheart, Carla, and raised one boy, Trey. Carla passed 5 years ago. Cancer took her slow and mean, and Trey's off in Chicago now. Big shot finance guy. Comes around maybe once a year, and even then he checks his watch more than he checks on me. These days, it's just me, 6 scrawny head of cattle, and a vegetable patch that's mostly wishful thinking. My pension and Social Security barely keep the lights on, and the water bill's high enough to make a man curse. But I get by. Fix what I can, patch what I can't, and cook everything from scratch. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-June, hot already by 8 a.m. I was sipping the 1 cup of coffee I allow myself each day and flipping through the Dry Creek Gazette for pages long and mostly church announcements and farm equipment ads. But that morning, a little headline tucked on the 3rd page stopped me cold. Veteran's widow faces eviction after husband's funeral. Her name was Elise Carter. Said her husband, Staff Sergeant Joel Carter, had passed from complications related to his last tour. Elise had spent everything they had on his funeral, left her and their 2 kids with nothing but a foreclosure notice and 30 days to move out. Joel Carter. That name punched me right in the gut. He and I crossed paths during my 2nd deployment. Different units, but I remember the kid. Quiet. Brave. During one hellish ambush near Basra, he helped load the wounded into the evac trucks while bullets cracked the sand around us. We never saw each other again after that, but some names just don't fade. That afternoon, I climbed into my old F-150, a '99 model that still rattles like a bag of bolts. I drove straight into town, walked into the Dry Creek First Bank, and asked to withdraw every dime I had saved up. $18,000, give or take a few dusty pennies. The teller, Maggie, looked at me like I was losing it. Wade, that's your entire savings. You sure about this? She asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't blink. Make the check out to Elise Carter, I said. Behind me, I heard that loudmouth Kyle Jensen, the same fella who keeps offering to buy my land, snort like a hawk. Old man Harlan thinks he's John Wayne, he muttered. Can't even fix his own fence, but he's handing out money like he won the lottery. I ignored him. Always do. Took my cashier's check, stuck it in an envelope, and drove home. Later that night, my neighbor Rusty stopped by, his brow furrowed deep enough to plant corn in. You've gone off the deep end, Wade. No one helped you when Carla got sick. When your well dried up last summer, you didn't get a single call. And now you're giving away everything you got to a stranger? I sealed the envelope with a lick and a firm press. He wasn't a stranger. He wore the same boots. That's enough. Rusty sighed. That was war. This is real life. Same damn thing sometimes, I said. Didn't matter what anyone thought. I wasn't going to let another uniform get left behind, not in life, and sure as hell not in death. The morning after I mailed the check, I found a bright orange notice stapled to my front door like some cruel joke. The bank was calling in my mortgage. Said I'd missed 3 payments and had 30 days to vacate. That wasn't how it usually worked, not around here. Normally, they'd send letters, make phone calls, give a man some warning. But this time, they skipped all that. Came down hard and fast, and I knew exactly why. Small towns run on gossip, tighter than any fence wire. Word of my big withdrawal must have reached someone at the bank. They figured I had money to burn. Truth was that 18 grand was my emergency fund, rainy day money. Guess they figured they'd better get theirs before I gave it all away to charity, as Kyle Jensen no doubt told half the county. I drove down to Tucker's Feed and Supply later that day, hoping to get a bag of chicken feed on credit until my next Social Security deposit hit. Tucker wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Wade," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "We're tightening accounts. Cash only." I stared at him a second. "Tucker, I've been buying feed here for 30 years. "I know," he said. "I hate it too. It's just policy now. New management rules." That was a lie. He was the same old management, same guy I'd helped move a hay trailer back in April. Truth is, folks smelled blood in the water. They saw the notice. They saw a man down and figured it was time to step back before the collapse. As I was walking back to my truck, Kyle Jensen hollered across Main Street, his voice loud and smug. "My offer still stands, Harlan," he called. "You can even live in the guest house if you want. Charity for charity, right?" His buddies laughed like that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I didn't say a word, just climbed into my truck and drove back out toward the ranch, the dust curling behind me like a ghost. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the county's Veterans Affairs office. Place hadn't changed in 20 years, same peeling posters, same flickering fluorescent lights. Took 2 hours before someone finally called my name. A young woman with tired eyes glanced at her screen. "Mr. Harlan, I'm sorry. You don't qualify for emergency assistance. Your property value exceeds the limit, even with the outstanding mortgage." "I'm not asking for a place to live," I told her. "Just some help feeding my animals until the end of the month." She sighed, softer this time. "Look, off the record, the system works best for veterans with viral stories. The ones with news coverage, fundraisers, hashtags. The quiet ones? The ones like you? They get lost in the shuffle." I thanked her anyway. Didn't get mad. That's just the way it is now. If you don't come with a marketing plan, you're a ghost in the machine. That night, I ate my last can of beans and a dry hunk of bread. Wrote a letter to Trey. Told him what I'd done, why I did it. I didn't ask him for anything. Didn't even mention the foreclosure notice. Just told him no one should die alone or live without being believed in. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock. Soft. 3 times. Not loud, not urgent. But at that hour? Unusual. I opened the door, cautiously, and found a woman standing on the porch. Late 30s maybe, hair tied back, posture straight like a soldier's, though she wore plain jeans and a sweatshirt. "Mr. Harlan," she said, handing me an envelope, "I can't stay. But you should know, you're not alone in this. We've noticed what you did for Elise Carter. Stand by." Before I could even speak, she was gone. The sound of a car fading into the dark was the only proof she'd been there at all. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. No letterhead, no signature. Just a message. "What you did has been noted. Stand by." I sat there at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at that paper. False hope is a dangerous thing. I'd learned that lesson more than once. But there was something in her voice, her eyes, like she wasn't just delivering words. She was delivering orders. I went to bed with my boots by the door. Didn't sleep much. Something was coming. I just didn't know if it'd be a storm or a miracle. The next morning cracked open with a dusty sunrise, the kind where the sky glows orange and purple for a few short minutes before turning that familiar flat, pale blue. I was on the porch with my chipped coffee mug, steam curling over the rim as I rocked slowly in the swing Carla had stained and hung herself decades back. That's when I heard it, not the usual putter of tractors or the wind scraping across dry earth, but something smooth, low, and purposeful. Engines. Multiple. Not the kind you hear often out in Dry Creek. I set the coffee down and stood. Off in the distance, past the cattle gate and up the dirt road that split my property, I saw the dust trail rising. 11 black SUVs, identical and spotless, moved in a perfect line, tires gliding over the ruts like they didn't feel a thing. No plates. No logos. Government issued, without a doubt. They pulled into my yard with synchronized precision, forming a tight row along the fence line. And then nothing. Silence. Engine shut off. Doors closed in perfect unison. Out stepped men and women in uniforms from every branched Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. The youngest among them couldn't have been more than 25. The oldest looked like he might have once walked the same desert trails I had. From the lead vehicle came a tall man, silver-haired, posture so straight you could have measured a table against it. The ribbons and stars on his dress coat made my chest tighten with a long-forgotten instinct. He marched up the porch steps and stopped just short of me. "Mr. Wade Harlan," he said, voice clear as bell chimes. "I'm Major General Landry Hale, Department of Defense, Special Operations Division. On behalf of the United States military, I'd like to extend our most sincere appreciation for your recent actions." Before I could speak, He offered a crisp salute. Reflex took over. I returned it. 40 years since I'd last done that. But some things don't rust. General, I said carefully, you're gonna have to explain this. I'm just a washed-up rancher who mailed a check. He didn't smile. He just nodded toward one of the other vehicles, from which a woman stepped out, dressed in civilian clothes but with the no-nonsense air of someone used to giving orders. She carried a leather binder, the kind that usually means trouble or salvation. Sometimes both. Elise Carter's husband, Staff Sergeant Joel Carter, was not just a Marine, she began, flipping open the binder to reveal documents stamped classified in red. He was a key operative in Operation Iron Nest, a deep-cover intelligence effort targeting international terror cells. My stomach dropped. After his diagnosis, Sergeant Carter turned over intelligence that dismantled 3 major networks. His testimony was so vital, his family was placed in the Witness Security Program. Since then, they've lived under complete cover. Your financial assistance prevented Elise from having to reach out to local organizations, which would have created a data trail. You preserved their protection status at a critical moment. I blinked at her. I didn't know any of that. I just remembered a good man and saw someone in need. That, General Hale said, stepping forward again, is what makes this extraordinary. Another officer approached, carrying a wooden case. He opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was a medal I'd never imagined holding. The Civilian Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor the military can bestow on someone not wearing a uniform. This is rarely given, Hale said, but unanimously approved in your case. You did more than donate money. You safeguarded a national security asset. I didn't know what to say. My throat burned, and for a second, I thought I might cry. I didn't, but I came close. There's more, Hale added, handing me a thick envelope. Your mortgage has been retired. The debt cleared. Your property has been designated a military heritage site under the Service Member Legacy Preservation Act. The Civil Relief Foundation purchased it in full as a matter of national interest. You're saying I own it free and clear? I asked, still not trusting my ears. Effective immediately, he confirmed. And with your permission, our engineering teams would like to make structural improvements. Barn, fencing, water systems. Nothing fancy, just enough to preserve what's already here. I nodded slowly. You've got my blessing. By mid-morning, a team of uniformed engineers was already at work. Marines were on the barn roof, hammering with the rhythm of a marching cadence. Army Corps folks were examining the well, marking plans with tape and chalk. They worked like they'd done this before, and they had. I stood back and watched, feeling like a man who'd stepped into his own funeral and found out it was a wedding instead. Carl Jensen drove by around noon. He slowed his truck to a crawl as he took in the sight, government vehicles, armed guards, a whole construction crew fixing what he'd spent years calling worthless. He didn't wave, didn't smirk, just drove on, pale as limestone. And for the first time in years, I felt something deep in my chest that wasn't pain or worry. I felt seen. By early evening, the old place looked more alive than it had in decades. The barn had a new spine, beam solid as the day they were built. The sag in the roof was gone, the rusted sheet metal replaced with clean panels that still matched the original patina. The fence along the south pasture was half done, and they'd already scoped out where they'd rebuild the collapsed corner by the old cattle pond. Inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table, my mug refilled more times than I could count, fingers tracing the embossed seal on the certificate General Hale had handed me. Every few minutes I'd glance at the medal, still resting in its box, as if it might vanish if I blinked too long. The knock came gently this time. Not urgent. Respectful. It was General Hale again. He stepped inside and stood in the same spot Carla had always used when she'd make her announcements, babies, bills, and every birthday I forgot. There's one more thing you should see, he said, offering me a second envelope. Inside was my cashier's check, the very one I'd sent to Elise. Folded around it was a handwritten note, neat script on lined paper. Mr. Harlan, your kindness came at a moment when I was at my lowest. You helped me and my children more than I can say, but I couldn't cash this check. Not after learning what it would cost you. The system may forget men like you. I won't. You didn't just save my husband in Iraq. You saved us again here, in quiet, invisible ways. This check belongs to someone brave enough to give it away, even when it meant losing everything. Thank you, from me, from Emma and Caleb, and from Joel. With gratitude. Elise Carter. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hand was steady, but my heart was doing somersaults. That check had been my safety net. I didn't want it back, but I understood why she sent it. She contacted us immediately after receiving it, Hale explained. Said we needed to know what you'd done, that your sacrifice needed to be honored. That's when we stepped in. I didn't reply, just stared out the window where a young Marine was driving a post into the hard red dirt. The same land my granddad had broken with a mule team. Most folks never know what happens after a good deed, I said finally. You toss a stone and don't see where the ripples go. I figured I'd just go under with mine. Hale nodded. You kept someone from drowning. That matters. Outside, the sun was dipping below the line of scrub brush, casting long shadows across the pasture. Lights flicked on along the barn's new roof. One of the engineers raised a hand to me from the gate and gave a half salute. I returned it, not out of habit, but out of something deeper. Something like pride. News crews showed up that evening, but they were stopped at the end of my driveway by military police. Cameras never made it past the gate. This man's privacy will be respected, one of them told a reporter flatly. Back in town, I heard later, folks were whispering. The bank manager who'd tried to push the foreclosure through showed up, red-faced and stammering, but a JAG officer intercepted him and led him aside. Nobody knew what was said, but the man left with his shoulders slumped like a wet coat on a hanger. The next morning, I found a new flagpole installed near the cattle gate. A young Special Forces officer told me he'd set the concrete himself, said it was tradition. From that day on, I raised the flag each morning at sunrise, same way I used to back at base camp, tight and crisp, with reverence. A few weeks later, a small boy came to the fence while I was patching a wire. He handed me a folded piece of paper, a child's drawing of a farmhouse, a man in a cowboy hat, and an American flag waving over the roof. My mom said to give you this, he said. She said you're the reason my dad could finally rest in peace. I looked up and saw Elise standing a few yards behind him, arms crossed gently, not in defiance, but something like grace. She gave me a single, solemn nod. Then she took her boy's hand, and they walked back to their car. That night, as I sat on the porch swing, the wind cool on my neck, I thought about Carla. I thought about the men I served with. About Joel Carter and the firefight that had forged a memory deep enough to still burn. Some people leave this world in silence, unnoticed. Others leave behind echoes that stretch for miles. I didn't do it for thanks. Didn't do it for medals or headlines. I did it because it was right. Because he wore the boots. And in the end, that was enough. A month passed. The ranch didn't look flashy or modern. No chrome gates or digital gadgets. The repairs had been done with care and restraint, like the workers knew this place didn't need change, just restoration. They kept everything in the same colors, barn red, chalk white trim, hand-sanded cedar posts. Even the porch swing, they didn't replace it. Just refinished the wood and reinforced the chains. Made sure it still creaked just enough to sound like home. The flagpole gleamed near the cattle gate, and each morning I'd hoist the stars and stripes with the same deliberate rhythm I used back in the desert. Funny thing about rituals, some of them die hard, and some you hope never do. The cattle herd had doubled, thanks to what they called a joint donation from various military units. 6 turned to 12. They were healthy, strong, and tagged with simple brass numbers, not barcodes or trackers. Just enough to know each by name. I kept working the land like I always had. Mended fence lines, watered the garden, kept the tractor oiled. A chaplain from Fort Riley dropped by twice a month, always, just passing through. He brought groceries, small talk, and sometimes news from veteran circles. Your name's come up a lot lately, he said once, sipping coffee at the table. You're kind of a legend now, Wade. I just shrugged. Legends don't patch leaky troughs. But I knew what he meant. There'd been ripples. It was the small things that reminded me most. Unmarked vehicles sometimes drove by slowly, the kind with tinted windows and government-issued tires. They never stopped. Just paused, acknowledged, then moved on. Like they were checking in without making a show of it. Watching over. One morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end said, "We just wanted you to know the Carters are doing well. Elise's kids are thriving. She's got a new job, off the grid but steady. Said to tell you she thinks of you every time she tucks them in." That stayed with me longer than any medal. Dry Creek changed after that. Not in ways most would notice at first. But people stopped whispering. Carl Jensen stopped driving by altogether. Even Tucker at the feed store started greeting me by name again, his hat in hand. The bank manager, the one who tried to fast-track my foreclosure, emailed me a letter. Not a formal apology, just a hand-scrawled note that read, "I was wrong. You deserved better. I hope someday I'll do one right thing too." I didn't respond. Some ghosts are better left wandering. Then, about 2 months after everything went down, I got a visitor I didn't expect. Trey. My boy hadn't been back in nearly 3 years, not since Carla's funeral. I'd seen him in suits and boardrooms, on video calls full of backdrops and buzzwords. But that day, he pulled into the yard in a dusty rental car, wearing jeans and boots that looked like they'd never seen dirt before. He stood by the porch stairs like he wasn't sure he belonged. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey, son." There was a long pause, the kind that held more than words ever could. "I saw the story," he admitted. Didn't know what to say. "You just said it," I told him. We sat on the porch swing for a while, passing a single cup of coffee between us like it was communion. He asked questions, real ones. About Carla. About the war. About why I'd given away everything to someone I barely knew. "She wasn't a stranger," I said. "She was a widow. Like your mom almost was. Like 1,000 others I never met." He nodded slowly. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. "I always thought you were just stuck in the past. But I see now, you were holding it up. So the rest of us wouldn't forget." That night, I opened Carla's old recipe tin and pulled out the photo she'd saved of me in uniform, standing next to Joel Carter back in Basra. I'd forgotten she had it. We looked so young. And now, well, I wasn't young anymore. But I'd never felt more alive. Because somewhere in the middle of my final chapter, I'd found a page worth writing down. The days settled into something like peace. Not the quiet that comes from nothing happening, but the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for the other boot to drop. I started sleeping through the night again. The kind of sleep where you don't keep one ear open for raccoons in the feed shed or memories that rattle like old ammo boxes in the back of your brain. Each morning, before the sun crested the ridge, I'd rise, make coffee in the same dented percolator I'd used for decades, and carry it out to the porch. The air was still cool then, and the ground hadn't yet remembered how dry it was. That flag? I raised it like a prayer. Not because I had to. No one told me to. It wasn't part of the agreement with the DoD or the Foundation or any of those suits who came and went in pressed uniforms. I did it because I owed it to those who never made it home. You don't spend your whole life trying to do right and forget the ones who laid the path before you. Sometimes a car would pull up just before noon. Not every day. But when it did, it was always someone different, a man with a navy pin on his lapel, a woman wearing an old airborne patch on her sleeve, once a young couple who didn't say much at all. They just stood at the gate, looked out at the land for a few quiet minutes, then left a small rock at the fence post before driving off. They never rang the bell, never asked for anything. I started a little pile at the base of that post, 28 stones and counting. No words on them, just smooth, worn pieces from rivers and roads far from here. One afternoon, the chaplain brought me a photo. It was from a reunion dinner held at a base over in Fort Collins. A dozen faces I didn't know, and one I did, Elise Carter, smiling next to a new plaque that read, "In honor of Staff Sergeant Joel Carter and the legacy of quiet valor." She started a fund, the chaplain told me. Help support families of operatives who die undercover. All anonymous, all off the books. Guess who it's named after? I didn't guess. I already knew. The Harlan Fund. Said so right there at the bottom in simple print. I hung the photo inside the barn, next to Carla's horseshoe charm and Granddad's old branding iron. I didn't need a frame. Just a nail and a little sunlight from the open loft above. Dry Creek was still Dry Creek. The gas station still sold warm soda. The post office still smelled like cardboard and regret. But folks looked me in the eye now. Tipped their hats. Tucker even came out to the ranch one morning with a sack of seed and didn't say a word about payment. Just left it by the barn and walked away. Then came the letter from the governor. Typed on official paper with a seal and everything, it said I'd been nominated for the Oklahoma Cross of Civil Service. Said they wanted to fly me to the Capitol, put me up in a hotel, shake my hand in front of cameras. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and stuck it in the junk drawer between the broken flashlight and Carla's old recipe for pecan pie. Awards are nice. But the real reward? That was waking up on land that still whispered my name. That was knowing the well ran clear again because someone cared enough to fix it. That was hearing a knock at the door and not flinching. One night, I sat on the porch as a thunderstorm finally broke the long, dry spell. Lightning danced across the far hills, and the air smelled like wet cedar and promises kept. In the distance, the barn glowed warm with new light. The cattle huddled close, dry and safe under a roof no longer sagging. And me? I just rocked in that swing, Carla's blanket over my knees, coffee gone cold, but my heart warmer than it had been in years. I was no hero. Never claimed to be. but I'd done something good. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. About 3 weeks after the thunderstorm rolled through, I got another unexpected knock at the door. This one came just before supper, while I was shelling purple whole peas at the table and listening to Merle Haggard hum out of the old radio. I opened the door, and there stood a woman in a blue blouse and jeans, holding a notebook and an audio recorder. "Mr. Harlan? I'm with American Valor Weekly. We're doing a series on unsung veterans who've made a difference. Would you be willing to talk?" I stepped outside and looked past her toward the road. No camera crew. No trucks. Just a dusty sedan and a polite face. "I'm not much for interviews," I said. She nodded like she expected that. "Elise Carter gave me your name. Said if I wanted to understand sacrifice, I should start here." I didn't say yes, but I didn't close the door either. We sat on the porch. I offered her tea and a piece of cornbread left over from breakfast. She didn't eat much, but she listened real close. Asked good questions. Not the kind meant for headlines, but the kind that came from someone who wanted to understand. She stayed till the sun dipped low, casting that warm orange light over the pastures. Before she left, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Elise wanted me to give you this." Inside was a picture of her and her 2 kids standing beside a small marker in a quiet cemetery. The stone read, "Staff Sergeant Joel Carter, father, husband, patriot." Underneath that, in smaller script, "Protected many, saved even more." On the back of the photo, in Elise's handwriting, "They sleep safe because you didn't walk away." I placed the photo beside the one of Carla and me on our wedding day. 2 moments I never wanted to forget. A week later, 2 young men showed up. One in uniform, the other with a prosthetic leg and a shadow of a limp. They didn't say much. Just offered their hands and said, "Thank you, sir." I didn't know their names, but I could tell from the way they looked around the ranch that they'd been told the story. One of them asked if I needed help with anything fence work, repairs, brush clearing. "Y'all aren't here to serve me," I said with a grin. "Respect goes both ways," the one with the limp replied. So I gave them work. Not out of pity, but out of shared understanding. They helped clear some of the deadfall down by the creek bed and hauled in a few loads of gravel for the front drive. We shared lunch in the barn, ham sandwiches, sweet tea, and the last jar of pickles Carla had canned before she got sick. I don't know if they realized how much that meant to me. I don't know if I did, until later. That night, I sat out under the stars and lit one of the cigars I'd been saving since my 60th birthday. It was dry, a little cracked, but still lit just fine. The sky stretched wide above me, clear and bright, stars scattered like old silver coins across a black velvet table. I thought about Granddad, how he'd once told me that a man's worth wasn't measured in what he built, but in what he left behind for others to stand on. And maybe, finally, I'd done a little of both. I didn't know what came next. Didn't need to. For now, I had good soil under my boots, wind in the rafters, and peace in my bones. And I'd learned something simple and true, that doing what's right doesn't always echo loud, but it does echo long. Not long after the boys left, I noticed something curious. A drone. Nothing flashy, just a quiet little thing that hovered at the edge of my property for a few seconds every couple of days before zipping off. It wasn't the kind kids flew for fun. It moved with intention, precision. Someone was still watching, but not in a bad way. I figured it was the same folks who'd shown up in the SUVs, just making sure the investment stayed in good shape. Or maybe it was their way of saying, "We haven't forgotten you, old man." I didn't mind. In fact, there was a strange comfort in knowing someone still cared enough to keep eyes on the place. Not out of suspicion, but respect. Then one morning, a package arrived by courier. No return address. Inside, a new pair of work gloves, a small tool set, and a note typed on the same paper as that first mysterious message. "For continued stewardship, we're still with you. SD." I laughed, out loud, alone in my kitchen. I hadn't laughed like that since Carla made fun of me for gluing my fingers together fixing a drawer in '03. That evening, I cleaned and oiled every tool I owned. Took inventory like I hadn't in years. Reorganized the shed. Repaired the gate latch that had been sticking since spring. I didn't know who the note came from exactly, but I knew what it meant. Keep going. That Sunday, the phone rang. Old landline. Barely works. Only reason I keep it is out of habit. "Mr. Harlan," the voice said. Young. Nervous. "My name's Corporal Reyes. I served with Sergeant Carter." I sat down slowly. "Go on." He paused, like he wasn't sure if he should even be making the call. Then, "He talked about you. Not often, but enough." Said there was this older guy, real quiet, real steady. Said you pulled him behind a Humvee when it got bad. I remembered that day. I was 19, Reyes said, his voice cracking. I was scared out of my mind. Joel, he kept us going. And he always said he learned that kind of strength from watching you. There was silence between us for a few seconds, then he added, just wanted you to know you made a difference long before that check. I didn't know what to say. So I just said, thank you, son. He cleared his throat. That picture Elise sent you? I took it. She wanted you to have it first. We didn't speak much after that. Didn't need to. Sometimes a few words carry more weight than 1,000. I hung up and stood there with the dial tone humming in my ear. I wasn't just a man who helped a widow. I've been part of a story I never knew was still being told. It's been a year now. The barn's still solid. The cattle are thriving. My mornings start the same: coffee, flag, fresh air. But something's different, even if I can't quite put it into words. Folks stop by more often. Not always to talk. Sometimes just to drop off feed or help stack hay. I don't ask why. I just nod and let him. Every so often, a letter comes in the mail from someone I never met. A widow. A soldier. A kid who grew up hearing about the man who saved someone he barely knew. They don't want anything. Just to say thanks. The pile of stones at the fence post keeps growing. Trey calls every Sunday now. Says he's planning to bring his daughter, my granddaughter, out this fall. Wants her to see where strength lives. Me. I just keep doing what I've always done. One fence post, one meal, one morning at a time. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to wear a badge to serve. Don't need a headline to matter. Sometimes the loudest echoes come from the quietest acts. I didn't set out to be anything special. I just didn't want someone to feel forgotten. And now, every time I see that flag rise, every time the wind catches it just right and makes it snap like it did in the old days, I remember. Not the pain, not the loss, but the moment one good decision lit a fire that never went out. If you're reading this and you've ever helped someone when no one else did, know this. You mattered more than you'll ever realize. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real legacy looks like.